Hi folks, Slices here. Now, number 5 of the first batch of 6. This is a Shirogorov. Now, this may look like a fairly straightforward, simple pocket knife. It may even look similar to the Chubikov that we looked at recently. But this is a Shirogorov. There's not much to tell you that except the bear symbol on there. But this is pretty iconic. This is their F95T flipper in the T-milled pattern, which is a titanium knife. Now, if you buy a new one, they're at M390. This was S30V, but it's a phenomenal knife. This is, most folding knife makers aim to make something that is as good as a Sebenza, and in its way the Sebenza is that sort of standard. Well, if you want to make a flipper, then the F95 is the standard to which knife makers want their actions to be. Now, I have flipped this knife I don't know how many times, and so far it has never failed to deliver a crisp, straightforward opening. And yet again, it succeeds with a degree of authority that is rare to find. And given my chunky hands and inability to flick most knives at all, to have never managed to fail to open this one in every time that I have done it is nothing short of a miracle. The action on this knife is just amazing. Once that blade starts to move, there's a fairly there's a good detent on it. There's a fair weight to it, but it's not a harsh or difficult detent. But once it breaks that detent, you kind of feel an inevitability that that blade is going to open, and it's going to open with a solid thunk when it gets there. It's the best flipping knife that I have ever had the joy to handle. But it goes further than that. Now, granted, this is, in inverted commas, just S30V steel. I think at the time that this particular one was made, that was probably the standard steel, in the way that M390 is becoming the standard steel for quality pocket knives today. It seems to be kind of creeping further and further down market, so it's becoming pretty much ubiquitous. I know Chris Reeves isn't going that direction. They went S45, sorry, and then they're going, I think they're going on the Magna Cut route. Shirogorov have gone M390, and many other manufacturers in the world have done so. But even in S30V, I love S30V. I think it's a great steel. My go-to pocket knife every day, the Enzo PK70, it uses S30V, and I've never had any reason to complain about it. I mean, yes, sometimes it's nice to get an upgrade over and above that, but honestly, the one that lives in my little man bag that goes out with me every day has never let me down. It's always kept an edge. I've never sharpened it. It's very occasionally had a very light strop, and that's all. And I can't imagine that being any different. Now, this knife is an expensive $1,000 knife. But it has been used. There's a couple of little marks in the blade here, and on the lock side there's a couple of marks on the clip, a little snail trail in here, and a little mark on the pivot. So it's clearly been carried, and as I say, the marks, and there's little marks in the blade, give away the fact that it has been used to cut things, and that doesn't surprise me. Because if I had this as a knife, there's no way it could just live in a box. It would have to get out there and do some work. Because if there's one thing that's perfect about this knife after the action, it's the feeling in the hand. It just fits in the hand nicely. It feels comfortable. All the edges have had that little chamfer taken off them. But at the same time, having this milled pattern in it means that there's good grip in the handle. You've got a bit of jimping on the back here, but as well as having that jimping to give you some grip, the edges of the jimping, you can see this, have all been chamfered. So you have the grip from the ripples on the back of the blade, but you don't have the tearing edges of the chamfer to make it uncomfortable. It's just beautifully done. The blade is a full flat grind, or almost full flat grind. There's a very small bit of flat just at the, in fact, where the jimping is, but it's almost full flat. That means that although it's fairly thick stock, it gets to a pretty phenomenally thin behind the edge, and it's very, very sharp. There's a wee flat spot there, so again, it's, you know, signs of use, which is a good thing. I think if you have a knife like this and you don't use it, you're missing so much. So it's a Reeves integrated lock, or a frame lock as most of the world would call it, with a metal steel insert there, which acts as an over travel stop as well. You've got this milled titanium clip, which is very nicely shaped. I mean, unlike most titanium milled clips, you've actually got a good curve in the bit that actually does the gripping in your pocket, which makes it relatively easy to get in and out of the pocket, which is one of the failings I often think of a titanium clip. I actually think the clip on a Rockstead, that bare metal clip, is one of the best clips out there. But actually, if you compare the profile of these two clips on the inside profile, they're very, very similar in terms of the actual shaping of them, and given the thinness of the clip here, you actually get a bit of spring in it, a bit like steel. I actually would still say the Rockstead clip is a better clip, but this one is very good, and it's not, you know, it's not bad compared. Now, you've got internal relief for the lock bar, but it's very nicely done. All the edges are smoothed. You know, it's done really very nicely. There's no attempt at milling on the inside of the knife though to reduce weight, so it is a good chunk in the hand, weighing in at 4.4 ounces, I believe. So you know, it's under 4 inches of blade length, 3.875 inches of blade length. So you know, it's probably a little on the heavy side, but it's not so heavy as to cause you a problem, and it certainly just feels right when you've got it in your hand. You know, it feels like it's going to do whatever you want it to do. You can depend on it. And there's no hot spots because of all that milling, despite all the, you know, the milling out of the pattern and everything else. Everything, even the edges of the flipper tab, they're all milled. You've no chance of choking up here, because if you put your hand in front of the guard there, you're straight onto the blade, and that blade is, as I say, sharp, so that's not going to happen. But you've got you know, a good almost 5 inches of handle, so you've plenty of room for your hand, even if you do have to stay that far back from the edge. Of all the 6 knives that I borrowed, this may not be the fanciest one. It might actually be the most expensive, but it's certainly not wildly more expensive. This is a mid-tech version of a Shirogorov. It's not a full-on custom or anything like that. It's, you know, it's mid-tech. It's $1,000 or $1,100 or something like that. But it's by far my favourite of all of the knives that I borrowed. May not have a fancy steel. There's no Damascus involved. There's no Damascus frippery or anything like that. It's just a solid, dependable knife. A bit like the Spyderco sway back in that respect. And you know, it's just a good solid standard knife, but in every single measurable way, this blade just has the edge. It doesn't have XTHP steel, but it's perfectly good at S30V. But everything else, the shape of it, the machining of it, just the cutout for the lock bar. Not only is it nice and neat and slim, they've also chamfered all around the edges, so there's no. One of the problems with a lock bar is often a sharp corner just here, which creates a hotspot. This is all beautifully rebated and chamfered. It's both. It's just a stunning knife. Yes, it has a proprietary tool, but I don't think you'd have any problem in an emergency just using a flat-bladed screwdriver in those slots. It's a 2-point fixing knife, like the Rockstead, or even the Sebenza for that matter. You know, you've a pivot screw and a tail screw. You have a pivot screw and a tail screw. The slight difference from the Rockstead is that you've got, in the Rockstead, your stop pin is a separate screwed in part, which I think is quite clever. It gives it an extra degree of stability. The stop pin in this is, I assume, hidden because you can't see it. So, or is it? No, actually, I'll belay that, as they used to say in the Navy. It's there. It's at the top. But it's obviously, it's like the Rockstead. It's just pressed in. I actually think that's one of the things that Chris Reeves got very right when he made the Sebenza, and that was by adding that third point of fixing. It means that you've got your bushing here, but this is also held by a similar, it's not, I don't know if you'd call it a bushing, but it is in effect the same thing. And that means that with your 3 points, like a three-seated stool, it's always going to be level. Whereas with these type of pushed-in stop pins, you can put pressure on them that way, but they never. You can't pull on them. So that means that if there's anything pushing the knife together at the front here, the opposite side to the stop pin, the stop pin is doing nothing to keep everything stable. If you're pushing down on it, yes, it's something to keep it stable. And if you're pushing back on it, like as though you're using the knife and pushing it into the ground, then obviously it's perfectly stable. It works. There's nothing wrong with it, but I just like the way that Chris Reeves had done it better. So, we've got a nice little cutout here for your thumb to sit in, and that also provides you with just that little bit more room, comfortable place for your finger to land when you flick the knife open. And I'm really trusting to fate. I'm just sure it's not going to open one day, but so far it just does every time. I say you have a nice comfortable place for your finger to land with no sharp edges, nice little groove, and then when you're using the knife, there's a little place to put your thumb if you're further back, or you've got the jimping if you're further forward, but you've a nice place either way. And when it comes to the lock bar relief, again, you've got a nice angled edge to push on here, so there is never any hard edge that you've got to press and that could create a potential hotspot. And finally, it didn't drop the first time because my finger was on the back of the flipper. I'm pushing it now, aren't I? There's 3 times in this video I've opened this knife, and 3 times it's fired out without question. and I've never had a knife that's done that that consistently. Right, and down it goes, drop shot. There's really nothing not to like about this. I mean, you could call it plain, but if you want a fancy version, there are fancy versions out there which have inlays. There are fancy versions that are just the same but are bronze or blue anodized. And as I say, I think there are a whole range of inlay patterns. You want it just stonewashed. Yeah, you name it. There's a version that will suit you, I'm sure. And as I say, most of them now are in 390. There's still a few S35s kicking around out there, but they're available at sufficiently large discounts that you know, they must make a good buy. Anyway, I will do a little comparison video of this with the Shirogorov Scout, because I think they're similar knives separately, and just give some idea of you know, how these two Russian knives compare. But for now, we'll call it quits. We'll say, if you like this stuff, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see the 6th knife in this run, and which is another Shirogorov, by the way, fancy one though, and you want to see that comparison, and the other, I think there's over 50 of these knives to come over the next year or so, if all goes to plan. If you want to see all of those, please subscribe, and remember to ring the bell if you want to know when they come up. Thank you very much. Bye.